mass transit security. He has testified countless times on the Hill, been quoted in USA Today countless times as well, and is a former Green Beret captain who served 3 tours in Vietnam. And then on the end, we have Chief Paul MacMillan, who is the chief of the Massachusetts Bay Transit Authority Police, which is the MBTA runs the mass transit system in the Boston area. It's the 4th largest transit system in the country with about, 500,000 riders a day in the whole?
1.3 million.
Okay, and of course the New York City transit system is the largest with about 8 million riders a day in the whole transit system?
Correct.
Okay. I want to start off my first question to you all in the audience. I actually feel like people should squeeze together and sit next to each other so we can get a real feeling of what it's like to be in a subway. And then just rock back and forth. But don't eat anything because we don't allow that in Washington. So how many people in here rely on mass transit, use it every day? Just what I thought. How many people here do not rely on mass transit, don't use it? Okay, so before all these people leave and go hit the cocktail hour, why should any of them care? Why should people who don't ride mass transit care about mass transit security? You want to take it away?
Brian, you want to go with?
Well, I mean, look, as we heard from John this epistle this morning, we board about 1.8 million passengers a day on aviation. The figures you're using right here, whether it's 12, 14, 15 million a day on transit. Actually, if you add buses, the figure goes up much higher. So, in fact, as these events affect our systems, there is a much broader audience for this even than there is for aviation travel. Second, an attack, a major terrorist attack, let's say something on the scale of a Madrid or a London or a Mumbai, is a national event, and we don't measure those national events by the magnitude to which they translate into a personal a threat of personal danger. In fact, we do that as we look at it as a community. I mean, the odds for all of those who are riding automobiles every day instead of rapid transit, the odds of an average American being killed in an automobile accident are about 1 in 8,000. Your odds of being killed by a terrorist are about 1 in a million. And yet we pay a lot of attention to these things simply because we are concerned about the impact that these terrorist attacks, in particular transportation, because you have concentrations of large numbers of people in confined areas, which lead to casualties, that has a devastating impact on the community, on those riders, not just those who are directly affected by the attack, and on the nation as a whole.
But what effect would it have on the nation for all the people who don't ride any mass transit system? How would it affect? I mean, 9/11 shut down the entire aviation system, which is the only national transportation network we have. For 3 days, it knocked a third of the value off the stock market. It put the economy in a slump. Would it do those sort of things?
I think it depends entirely on the magnitude of the attack. And I don't think that the nation reacted to 9/11 the way it did because aviation was shut down. Our response was not, we are really angry at Al-Qaeda because they knocked down air traffic in the United States for 3 days. It was the magnitude of the event, the psychological impact of the event. And that, in that sense, it makes little difference what the specific venue is, whether it's an aviation venue, a surface transportation venue, or theoretically some other type of venue. If we got up to an event on the scale of the Mumbai attacks, the Bali attacks, the Madrid attacks, that would have a major impact. I suspect it would also have an impact on the economy. Okay. And it would create political crisis.
All right, Chief Monaghan, let's say the number 5 train going from the Upper East Side in Manhattan to Midtown Manhattan, where all the offices are, and then to Wall Street, is attacked. What happens? What happens? Do you shut down the entire system in New York?
Well, operationally, there are protocols in place to immediately shut down the system in the event of a terrorist strike.
So the entire New York City subway system?
The entire system, buses and subways.
Buses and subways.
And
commuter rail?
Commuter rail also.
Okay.
And that would be a decision made by that particular agency. But in New York, the buses and the subways would immediately shut down. And that's on a bona fide, confirmed terrorist strike, be that biological, explosion, or chemical. And that is done through rail control. Rail control is the MTA's control center that actually runs the trains. We, the NYPD, have a presence at that control center 24/7 in order to implement that shutdown on the direction of the police commissioner or a duty chief who confirms that it is indeed a bona fide event.
How long is it shut down for?
Well, that depends on the scope and the magnitude of the event. There is a lot involved as far as evacuating the system, shutting it down, and restoring it. So you're talking definitely several days.
Several days.
At minimum.
Okay, at minimum. What happens in Boston? You find out that New York City subway system is attacked. You shut down your system?
We're going to shut down our system based on the attack in New York, depending on the scope of the attack. Now, maybe one just bus in New York City, we probably wouldn't sit down. But an attack on the New York City subway system, we're going to shut down, and we're going to take scope of what the situation is. One of our concerns is now that they have these multiple attacks in different cities. So maybe they attack in New York, we keep running, and they have an attack on us. So we want to shut down, take a scope of the system, see what's going on the system, evacuate the system. And you may make a good point about when you start up, and I tell my general manager, it's easy, I can shut it down. I just don't know when I'm going to start it back up, because we've got to search, we've got to evacuate, and we've got to make sure it's safe before we send people back down to it. So it's an interesting question. Shutting down's easy. Starting up is going to be very difficult.
So you would start up basically when you felt sure that the system was safe?
Right. Now, what you've done when you've shut down now, you've sent at rush hour 300,000 or 400,000 people up into the city streets.
Right.
Creating an old situation up there of where they're going to go and what they're going to do. So it's shutting down's is a multi-tiered approach to what we have to do. It's not just it's easy to shut it down. Where is everybody going? What are they supposed to do? There's got to be a whole public relations piece to this whole thing too.
How prepared are you for that?
We've done a lot in tabletop exercises on how we're going to do that. To physically shut down the system and drill on it, that's impossible really to do. So we've got plans in place to evacuate the city by commuter rail, by bus, but all obviously untested.
And I assume you would shut down if Boston was attacked?
Not necessarily. The protocol right now is in place for an event on the system. But we would certainly be in touch with Paul and myself and Intel, and we would make that decision based on what's actually happening. It's a very, very good possibility that we would. We would certainly go into a mode of extreme visibility, shutting down certain entrances. We would be deployed throughout the entire system in the event. We do that when there's an event such as Mumbai, London. We react immediately.
What would security look like as soon as you reopen the system in the subways? So it's however many days, 4 days, you open the system. What would security look like?
Well, we actually have experience in having the system shut down for several days. A few years ago, there was a transit strike. And I have to take exception to the premise that most people don't take mass transit. In New York, the subway affects everyone. Most people somehow take the subway. You can see that when the MTA announces a fare increase. It's in the news, everyone's involved. So it is a very big part of the average New Yorker's life.
It's true. In the cities where, like New York, Boston, Washington, Chicago, it's huge. But we got about 3% of our audience here does it. So, but anyway, what would it look like after you reopen after a terrorist attack?
We will have cleaned up whatever that particularly needed, whether it's chemical, repairing the system. When we had 9/11, there was massive construction that was needed to repair the system down in Lower Manhattan. So when we would turn it back on, I can say that we will have been able to secure the system either through locks or uniform presence, and turn it over. And that requires a partnership with the operators of the system, the MTA. And their employees would be a big part in putting it back together.
Would security change if Boston was attacked, if the T was attacked? Would we see something different
when we reopened?
Right. After 9/11,
right.
The airports look like military bases.
Right. We would definitely enhance our security posture based on the attack.
So what does that mean?
It would be more high visibility patrols. We do random security inspections. We would do more of those. We would have other anti-terrorism teams out there as well, more canines on the system patrolling. So we would have an enhanced security posture when we open up the system. We want to talk a little bit about resiliency. We'll be open and running. Whether everybody's going to ride it is the next question. We will get into the psyche of the American public on whether they're going to bounce back and say, I'm going to take the T now. The chief said it's safe. Well, I don't think that's going to happen just because I said it was safe. I think in London they went right back on it. I think there's a different mindset over there, and maybe Brian might want to comment on this a little bit about, are we going to get our riders back right away? Is that going to happen?
Would there be a permanent change, do you think? I mean, talk about in the days when you reopen, you're going to have a security presence. Obviously, part of that is to reassure people and get them back riding. Does that last until a week or two, or do you think there would be any permanent changes in your system if it were attacked?
It would be tough to say. I think it would be gradual when they came back. I think we would get them back, but it would be very gradual.
Brian, what sort of national changes do you think a subway attack would trigger? I mean, everyone, any sort of terrorist attack, even ones that have been mildly not successful, have triggered changes. Like, you go back to the bombing of the Murrah building, and all of a sudden, in 1995, now there's tremendous security around every federal building and every federal courthouse. You can't, Pennsylvania Avenue around the White House is a street hockey area. Would there be national changes?
There would be some immediate consequences. I think the systems that we have across the country, each one of those systems would be making individual decisions about whether or not they shut down or what level of security. But you have to keep in mind a fundamental difference about transportation security, surface transportation security, compared to aviation. Aviation is a national system, and it runs at a national level all the time. Surface transportation is run by individual operators and individual jurisdictions, and so they will make individual decisions. The second important difference is one of resources constraints, and that is we invest a huge amount, more than $7 billion a year, to maintain our aviation security.
$7 billion.
Yeah, but it's about I think 7.4 billion is the last figure that I saw, something like that. Whereas those kinds of resources simply are not available for surface transportation. And so
you're talking about federal resources, because
even if we total up all of the local resources, we're not going to get anywhere near that number. And so what you see instead, the way surface transportation reacts, is that to have security that it can ramp up. I mean, we can't ramp up aviation security that much more because we're so close to the top. From where we are now, there isn't a big space between that and the ceiling, basically shutting the system down. Whereas in surface transportation, the security operates at a normal level. Then, in light of a potential terrorist threat, intelligence indicating there's some kind of a threat, or an event takes place somewhere else in the United States or somewhere abroad, then they will ramp that up, but costs considerations are very, very quickly going to oblige them to bring it back down. So what you have in surface transportation are more flexible systems where basic security as a continuing platform goes up and it goes down in accord with the circumstances.
Let's talk a little bit about what the threat is. I know that there's a lot of intelligence sharing. So you all get intelligence about. You do. What's the intelligence telling you about the likelihood of an attack on transit? Whether it's who's likely to do it.
Well, the threat itself is what we're looking at now is the IED threat, and also the multiple location threat with active shooter, similar to a Mumbai incident. A lot of our training now is done with active shooter at multiple locations.
Multiple locations in the same system?
In the same system. So we look at that as the most distinct possibility now is some IED attacks and also small arms fire, rifles, attack like that, active shooter situations. That's the most prevalent threat that I think that we're talking about right now.
Mm-hmm. Same for you?
Yes, it is. In addition to that, as far as intelligence goes, in 2002, Police Commissioner Kelly created the Counterterrorism Bureau, and he also restructured the Intelligence Division, which, as far as intel goes, we have police officers, police detectives, high-ranking people, senior people, that are positioned and embedded with police departments around the world, in all areas of the globe. And we see that intel coming in from them in close to real time as you can get. We've seen that in Mumbai, where we got real-time briefings from the person assigned to the post over there. And with that intel, we react, we deploy, we set up our tactics according to what the threat is or what has happened. I think the most recent threat that we've been working on or looking at and deploying for is the rail sabotage, the rail derailment type of threat that could certainly cause a lot of damage and injury to a train going around a curve.
Mm-hmm.
Let me add something to that. First of all, with regard to Chief MacMillan's comment about preparing for multiple incidents, we know now from a database that we constructed at the Mineta Transportation Institute that looking at these past incidents, when a bomb goes off on a surface transportation target, in 16% of the cases there is a second and in some cases third, fourth, and fifth device. 16%. So you got roughly a 1 in 6 chance that there's another one out there on the system. But in terms of the general threat level, let me give you another statistic, which I think is more interesting as we try to compare how we do security in aviation, as we were talking about this morning, and how we do security for surface transportation. Since 9/11, worldwide, there have been 75 terrorist attacks on aviation targets, airports and airliners, which resulted in 157 fatalities. During the same period of time, there have been 1,804 attacks on surface transportation targets, terrorist attacks, which resulted in 3,900 fatalities. A vastly greater number on surface transportation. Now, people say, well, look, when an airliner comes down, that's a big event, but surface transportation targets, those are smaller events. Of those events, 11 of those events since 9/11 resulted in 50 or more fatalities per event, and 3 of them were in the 200 range. Mm-hmm. Put that statistic together, that is the equivalent of 7 crashes of large airliners, not commuter airliners, but full hull losses of airliners. If we had lost 7 airliners since 9/11 to terrorism around the world, we would be going crazy.
So it raises the obvious question, why hasn't the U.S. been attacked? I know there have been plots. The plot means lots of different things. Anyone here, why do you think that there has not been a successful attack? I mean, London, Madrid.
We know there have been plots, some of them embryonic, some of them more mature. But you can ask that about any venue in the United States. The fact is, a question that we don't have an answer to: why hasn't the United States suffered a higher level of domestic terrorist activity carried out by jihadist terrorists inspired by Al-Qaeda's ideology? Why haven't we seen that since 9/11? It's not because of security, because if you look at the targets that are attacking abroad, these targets are vulnerable in the United States. Is it because of intelligence? Yes, intelligence has been effective. Is it because there are relatively few, despite the efforts of Al-Qaeda to recruit and exhort people to action, relatively few have turned out in response to that call? 4, because those that have turned out, fortunately, have been of remarkable low competence. Mm-hmm. And so we've gotten away with it. In part, it's also just luck.
And I have to add, it's also the visibility of the uniformed cop. What we've done in New York is simply create a visible police presence on the subway, and that's throughout the city. You know, we're utilizing every resource that the New York City Police Department has available to us. We're constantly on the move. We're utilizing officers from every precinct, 76 precincts, to supplement the 2,500 officers that we have in the Transit Bureau to create these mass surges. And it's very impressive, and it gives the message to whoever is surveilling us that we are ready. We have a force of dealing with multiple shooters or heavy weapons. We've trained our recruits coming into the academy, and over our detectives assigned to specialty units on heavy weapons and close combat battle tactics. So we have done a lot to show that we are prepared.
And you've done similar things.
Right, obviously on a smaller scale than New York City, but we do this very similar operations and security initiatives that almost all transit agencies do in the country. One thing that I know New York and MBTA does as well are the random security inspections. And that's something that TSA has been pushing for a number of years. We've been doing it since 2007. And it's just another layer of security at some of our entrances to our stations where we swipe the outside of a bag for explosives. It takes all of about 20 seconds, and the people are on their way, absent a positive reading, obviously. So there are a number of security initiatives, I think, in place, high visibility patrol being a key point of them. And but to Brian's point, let's face it, we know that subway systems are vulnerable. We've seen it around the world, and we know that they're very difficult to protect. So to your point of why it hasn't happened, we can all speculate on that, and we can all speculate on why there hasn't been any attack, as
Right.
Brian points out.
Let's talk for a second about money. Brian, you raised the point that the federal funding for mass transit security has been on the order of about $200 or $300 million a year each year. Through the Transit Security Grant Program, which is a competitive grant program run by FEMA, I believe. Both of your agencies have gotten a lot of that money, but money also goes to very small systems. Although, of course, it's important to point out that mass transit security is really the responsibility of the local agencies, the local police department. Let's say that members of Congress have been talking for years about wanting more money. Obviously, this is not the day to be talking about more money from Washington. What would you do if you suddenly had a windfall of more money? How might you spend it? What more could be done?
What I think we've gotten to the point, and you mentioned that we are a recipient of a lot of Homeland Security funds in Boston, as in New York. Some are not as fortunate, and the money is distributed on a risk-based system. Mm-hmm. So what we're looking at now is we've got, on the front end, we've got a lot of that money, and we're building out our infrastructure, access control, better fencing, cameras, CCTV cameras, portal protection systems, high visibility patrols, and the like. What I think we'd like to see now is some type of sustainment fund as we move forward. We've got the front end done, mostly done, or it's in the pipeline. And what's going to happen, I think, what we're going to see is this money start dwindling down. And the agencies, the local agencies, can't sustain what we've been doing on those federal dollars. Kind of got us hooked on it. And as we all know, the transit agencies in this country, from a budget problem, are suffering. So their infrastructure, their operational issues are huge, and there isn't any money to even fix that. Mm-hmm. I would suggest that as the money dries up, and we have to take on these initiatives on our own, they'll be one of the first things that we're going to be cut. And they're going to go towards making sure the trains and the buses run safely. The security piece is going to fall in the backdrop. So what we're looking for from the federal government is some type of long-term sustainment piece that we can keep this going with all of our budget troubles that we face operationally.
Along with the sustainability, we're very concerned with the combination of human resources and technology. Now, we're very grateful to our federal partners for what they've provided us by way of grant initiatives. You know, we've funded 104 anti-terror team officers that are additional cops on the subway, along with our domain awareness system, technology. But it's that combination of uniformed cop and the technology, such as CCTV, the Lower Manhattan Security Initiative. These are all important things, but there's a cap, and that cap is 10% personnel issues, and the rest goes to capital, capital projects. So obviously, to police the system, we need people, and the technology is very important. But it's the human factor that we'd like to see a different balance as far as grant funding goes.
Let's talk a second about technology. You just mentioned CCTV. When you talk about CCTV, you're talking about, what, 1970s era technology? I know it's much more sophisticated now, and but when you look at the kind of technology there is in the airports now, you've got the body scanners that don't even make you look like a person. There isn't really a lot of that. There's no scanning technology in subways. It's not at all feasible to have aviation type screening. You look like you want to say something, but let me just finish. Is there hold on. The Homeland Security Department has spent a lot of time testing technology, whether it's dogs doing vapor wake, putting doing finger analysis, trace detection of fingers when people put their cards in the kiosks, or even what they call standoff detection. So you set a camera up over there, and it just sort of scans underneath people's clothing while they're walking by. None of that is ready for prime time. Do you think that at some point there is going to be some kind of scanning technology in the subway systems that can do some kind of screening of people?
Well, all of the entrances that you have in a subway system, such as New York, over 800 entrances, you have to remember we got to move people. Who is this guy?
Yeah. Al-Qaeda flying.
We got to move people, and we got to move them fast. So the idea is random and unpredictable screening. And we do that now with trace detection, explosive trace detection, and that's the technology out there right now. But as far as CCTV, we've implemented the analytical video, intelligent video, if you may.
What is that? Explain.
Well, that's technology that can identify an unattended bag, something out of the norm, a crowd that's going one way down a corridor. All of a sudden, that crowd splits in two or goes a different direction. The software enables a monitor of the camera to actually zero in with an alarm. So we have that technology, but you got to remember, in the New York City subway system, it's a very, very harsh environment. So what technology is out there may work in other systems, may work in the airport, but in 110-degree heat, with the soot, with the crowds, and remember, the subway system is an old system, built in 1904. Mm-hmm. So that's the problem with technology.
I think the Boston subway system's even older, is it not?
Yes, it is. It's the oldest in the country.
Yeah.
Sorry.
But you don't have to.
I don't believe you're going to see the scanning of passengers in the subway system. I don't think the public will stand for it, to be honest with you. I really don't, unless we get to a point where we're having regular attacks on our system and the public outcry is you've got to make it safe. But we're not there yet, and I don't anticipate be there. We've experimented with a number of things on our system, and each time there's pushback from the public about what it is and what it's going to do. So I don't anticipate that. One thing, though, even with all of the technology by itself doesn't make the system safe. So you have to have a human factor. You have to have personnel. So you talked about the ticket liquor. The explosive's going to check if you're putting your money in and it's got explosives.
Right.
Somebody's got to respond to that alarm. Right. Somebody's got to interview that person. Somebody's got to do something when an alarm goes off. So there's a whole human factor with all of the technology. And again, getting back to my previous comment, we're in budget problems. We're in budget crisis. Right. We're not going to get more personnel to react to those alarms.
So let's talk for a second about the see something, say something, which is now it's a trademark term. I didn't realize that, but it's something that
I didn't either.
Yeah.
Until I got a letter from MTA.
Yeah. Is it your trademark?
No, it's the New York City MTA trademark.
Okay.
It's simply a very simple saying that encourages public awareness and do something about it.
Right, and every day I get on, when I board the subway in Washington, D.C., I walk by one of those see something, say something, and it might as well be a billboard for Chuck E. Cheese. I tune it out, and it becomes, and this is one of, I guess you've got two issues to deal with. One is that it just becomes part of the landscape, and people pay no attention to it. The other seems like people maybe pay too much attention to it, and you start getting besieged with people reporting what they think is something suspicious, or maybe it's someone who looks like what they think a terrorist looks like. What is the efficacy of this? I know, Brian, let's start with you, because you talked about how it was used in Ireland.
Well,
or in
actually, in the UK during the IRA bombing campaign, and of course there was a great deal of incentive because the IRA was placing bombs on the tube and in rail stations regularly, as well as calling in a number of false alarms to create trouble for the system. And so there was powerful incentives on the part of the public to participate, and they did so. And they did so to the extent that the authorities were able to depend on the fact that somebody would notice a suspicious object or suspicious person within a couple of minutes. The people performed the role that the chief here was talking about in terms of these smart cameras. However, in order to make that work, and the reason it worked there is in part because of the threat, but also another factor, and this is why you dismiss appropriately so, dismiss these warnings to see something, say something. And that is, keep in mind we're operating in a pre-cell phone environment in the UK. You have to have three components to make this work. One, you have to enlist the public, that is through signage, through public affairs announcements and so on. You have to tell them to watch out for things. Number two, you have to provide a readily available means of communications. And they had regular phone boxes in the tube and that were dedicated to security. So you didn't have to look around for a phone, look around for somebody. There was something you could go right up to. And they had camera coverage both of the phone, and they could do an initial diagnosis with their cameras in the system. And then number three, you have to have closure. That is, somebody has to be seen going out to look at the object or to say something to the people who report it. Thank you, we're on it. Mm-hmm. If you don't have the second tune, what we do right now in the United States, we have exhortation. See something, say something. But if you don't have the facilitated communications, and you don't have the closure in terms of something then happens to, in a sense, psychologically reward the person for that, then these things don't work. We are now in an age in which cell phones are ubiquitous, and one of the things that is being explored is enlisting people with their cell phones not to have to type out a message. If I had to do that, I can type out messages on a cell phone about the speed at which I could send Morse code. But a pull-down text or just an automatic hit, using even the camera on the cell phone, it gives you your location automatically, goes to a center, somebody sends you back a text saying, we're on it, something happens, then you can enlist the public. Now, we're not going to be finding lots of bombs. That's the reality, and that's good. But you can, even with red team testing, that is leaving behind devices and so on, test your performance, test what your false alarm rate is. And the UK dealt with a lot of false alarms. They picked up a lot of lunch bags that were left behind. But they accepted that as a price. You can, if you put in that system, you can see if it works, you can tweak it, and you can make a relatively inexpensive gain in security, and that's what
Chief
this is about.
Monaghan, how long has MTA had,
Well, that saying's been out there for several years now. In fact, it's a national drive.
How effective
well,
do you think, what has it actually done in New York City?
We do get a significant amount of reports of unattended bags where people see something and
these are passengers calling?
These are passengers that may see a bag or a knapsack on a platform, and they do call. And we are very happy to get those calls because we check it out.
They call 911 or how do
they call 911?
Is that what they're supposed to do?
Yes, because we want to react to that immediately. And then we have a whole protocol on what to do, whether it's the uniformed officer, whether it's canine, whether it's an emergency service response, which leads to a bomb squad response, and we deal with each incident, depending on what needs to be done.
Is it I want to get to you in a second. Is it to a point where it's overwhelming, or are you happy? Are there too many calls?
Well, we move people. We move people very, very well. Mm-hmm. We do have times where we have to shut down a platform, but it's much better to err on the side of safety and inconvenience people than to have the unthinkable happen with a bag.
Chief MacMillan?
What you first talked about was complacency, and that's one of the things we're going to struggle with as we move forward. And as Brian says, we haven't had an attack, so everything's fine, don't worry about a thing, and we'll stop reporting. But what we did, we mix up our See Something, Say Something campaign from time to time, just give it a new look, a new feel, try to invigorate the public. One of the things we worry about is the fact that people are it's part of the backdrop. I have an announcement on the PA system, and they're sick of it. You go to community meetings, shut up. Stop saying that. But I think it's important to keep that message out there, keep it fresh. And what we do is when we get the call, we investigate it, and we get back to the person who called if they left a number to tell them what happened. Explain to them thank you very much for calling, and this is what it was. Turned out to be nothing or whatever it was. And we've opened up a whole new area of gathering information. We have a Twitter account. People can tweet us with pictures. It also works for local crime as well. And we have a texting line, so people can text us stuff. If they're afraid to talk on the train, they can just text us, hopefully a little faster than my colleague. Yeah. And so you talk about, but the See Something, Say Something campaign is a crucial component. The public is one of the most crucial components of us doing our job. We have to get information from the public in order for us to react to situations. So it's a crucial piece.
I want to talk just one more thing before we go to questions about this issue of resiliency. And it seems that everyone agrees that it's very, very hard to stop one of these attacks. And the whole mindset is different from aviation, where it's all about stopping it. And resiliency is not an issue because when the plane's blown up, there's nothing left to be resilient about. But in the subway system, resiliency is a much bigger issue because you're not going to destroy an entire system. Tell me what sort of exercises either of you have done in terms of simulating an attack and what you've learned from that. I assume do you do those exercises? You simulate a bomb going off and...
Right. We do 1 or 2 exercises a year on that. One piece, though, that we really haven't discussed, and I think it's an important piece, is if there is an attack on the system, we're going to need the employees to come back first before the passengers come back, and we have to ensure those employees. It's one of the things that we learned from London. We had some officers go over to London after their attack, and one of the things they had to do was convince the workers, the transit workers, to come back and drive the trains and buses because they wanted to know that it was safe. So that's an important piece. When you talk about resiliency, you need to get those employees back to work, and you need to convince them first that the system is safe.
That's very true. Chief MacMillan's point about getting the employees back, we do have the experience on 9/11 of transit workers evacuating the system. They came back. They came back very, very quickly. As far as resiliency, it's very involved. We do exercise. We exercise several times a year, and that's where grant money comes in. We just had an exercise involving a radiological attack called Securing the Cities, which involved 150 different agencies in the metropolitan area, creating over 100 checkpoints looking for a radiological piece coming into the subway system or any other high-profile area in the city. And it works. The exercising, the tabletop exercises, it gets you in that frame of mind of creating a scenario in your mind and talking about it before you're actually dealing with it.
I guess what you said about the lesson learned from London, I know that both of you had sent people to London, Madrid, and maybe other places. What are some of the main lessons learned from Madrid and London beyond what you just talked about?
Well, multiple perps. You always have to be prepared for that secondary incident. That secondary incident that's going to target the first responders. As far as heavy weapons, we have to be prepared for a heavy weapon scenario, which we reacted to. We've learned lessons like everyone from these horrible incidents.
Well, some of the things we also learned about were the rescue operations that took place, especially in London, when they had to evacuate people from the tunnels. We learned some lessons there on how to do that better. So some of the things we bring back are important on the back end of this attack so that we can get the system back up, fix the infrastructure, get the system back up and running, try to restore that confidence to the people that the system is safe. And we do that by getting it back up and running as quickly as possible.
All right, let's go to questions. If you have a question, raise your hand. Right here in the... If you could just say who you are, that would be helpful.
Tom Goldberg. Quick question with regard to funding the transportation bills that you all depend on for your grants is really under the knife. Chairman Micah in the House is looking at a very small bill going forward. His counterpart in the Senate, a slightly larger bill. So this shifts the focus away from federal funding into a new model, if you will, called public-private partnerships. When you look at that as a possibility going forward, either public-private being municipal public and then some investors, or state and investors in the owning of the assets, be it the Lincoln Tunnel or the Ted Williams Tunnel or some segment of the subway systems that you operate. How will that affect how you administer the very programs that you all have been talking about?
Just on the public-private piece, in the MBTA in Boston, one small thing we're doing is giving naming rights to our stations to try to raise some revenue. But it's not going to be significant. The MBTA has an operating budget for shortfall next year of $161 million and a capital deficit of over $4 or $5 billion. So the public-private partnership is very limited in scope, and I don't anticipate that there are any private industries that are going to come and give us that type of money to bail us out.
Is there anything you can talk about?
Yeah, we have a very important partnership with a private entity, the New York City Police Foundation, which are very strong partners in our crime fighting and counterterrorism efforts. In fact, they fund much of the initiatives that we do, such as the liaison program where we have officers assigned overseas.
Next question. Right here on the aisle.
Thank you. David Trulio, Raytheon Company. There was an interesting discussion of CCTV, video analytics, and explosive detection, and fully recognizing that technology is only one piece of the overall solution, especially in a declining budget environment. What are some of the needs that Boston and New York, from a technology perspective, what do you want to hear about? What do you wish you had? Just curious, what kind of stuff do you
operationally, need? Well, we want more CCTV. We're building that out a lot with federal funds. A lot of cameras are in the pipeline. They're not there yet. We want to get CCTV on our vehicles. We have CCTV on over about 400 or 500 buses. We'd like to expand that. So the short answer is CCTV. We also want to expand out our chemical sensor program, and we anticipate doing that within the next year or so. And we're also doing testing with MIT Lincoln Labs on biological testing. So there are a number of things there. But as John Pistol mentioned this morning, and Owen's mentioned, and I've mentioned, high visibility random patrol of uniformed officers is the key component to a safe subway system. And so you get into the technology piece, that's great, we like it, but we also need officers to patrol the system.
We have upgraded the CCTV capabilities greatly, networking over 500 cameras at the 3 hubs, Penn Station, Grand Central, and Times Square. Those are NYPD cameras that are monitored, and they have all the capabilities that we need. However, the transit system, being as old as it is, was not built for CCTV. So much of the implementation of the cameras are certainly not networked, and it's stovepiped, which creates difficulties in tying everything in together. So we're working on that. The MTA is working on that, and that requires money.
Just one more comment on the CCTV. We know it's a deterrent to a certain extent, but it's usually used for forensic purposes after the fact. We want to find out what the suspects did, follow them on the camera, similar to what London did, but it's not the cure-all to make a safe transit system. It certainly helps, but it's only one piece of the puzzle. And I would suggest that if it deters and prevents, in a certain extent, that if the attackers are not suicide bombers, they've left the area, we use that to identify them and then prevent the next attack. So there is a preventive piece to it.
Sir, right here.
Kevin Green from IBM. For the two chiefs, this is a counterterrorism discussion, but I'd just like to ask if you've seen an associated reduction in other kinds of crimes concurrent with the installation and use of these counterterrorism tools.
We did until iPhones came out and proliferated the market, and now we've seen our robberies go up, and I know Owen is the same problem.
You're talking about snatches of
Snatches of iPhones have driven the crime rates in our system and in other systems, in fact, in the country. But we did see there is a byproduct from all of this high visibility patrol, these anti-terrorism teams, that it is a deterrent to regular street crime as well, yes.
We love cameras. We have made several high-profile arrests based on the cameras. We're able to print out wanted posters of bad guys instantaneously. So we really value the cameras. But again, it's after the fact. We have experienced a decrease in crime over several years. In 1990, we were averaging 49 felony crimes per day in the subway system, and that included 26 homicides on the subway system for the year 1990. Go back to 2010, we were below 6 crimes per day. So we went from 49 crimes a day to 6 crimes per day. In the last couple of years, I have to think that some of that reduction was due to certainly the hard work of the NYPD Transit Bureau and the rest of the police department, but also the camera capability.
What was it like in 1974? I'm just.
Well, we had movies like The
Death
Taking of
Wish,
Pelham,
yeah,
1, 2, 3.
the original, right?
The subway had a very, very negative connotation, but now.
In Boston, we've seen this slowly trend go downward. We're average about 1,000, a little under 1,000 Part 1 crimes a year on the subway system. That's about 3 a day. Those are serious crimes, Part 1 crimes, robberies, larcenies, and the like, assaults. And it's leveled off right around there. We had our lowest year 2 or 3 years ago, and it's starting to creep back up, and I attribute it a lot to the technology equipment that's out there that's very valuable and can be easily stolen.
I'm Kent Blackmer. I represent the local transportation public authority here called the Roaring Fork Transportation Authority. And my first question is let's say there was an attack at Grand Central Station. How do you prevent pandemonium that would create a stampede and countless deaths in that sort of incident, and talk about an impact on our national psyche if that were to happen? And the second question is to Mr. Jenkins, and that is, we have concerns that when we have special events in our area that, say, for example, like X Games and so forth, that our conveyances could be means of transporting a terrorist attack, and I wonder if there's any work being done to examine that issue.
Start with you, Chief.
Well, as far as the pandemonium that would occur, each transit district, each precinct has disorder response plans. So something like that would be a coordinated effort to get people outside, get them from down below, get them off stuck trains, and orderly get them as quick as possible up to the street. Now the precinct would take over and evacuate those people to better, safer areas from there.
Terrorists in general want to create fear and alarm. We know that our jihadist foes have two principal criteria for target selection, and that is, one, does the target have iconic, or to use their terms, emotional value? Is it something which represents something which will carry some symbolic weight? And the second is it an opportunity to run up a high body count, which has become the metric for often their measuring their success in terrorist attacks. So if you take a major public event, whether it's a sporting event or a political event or something like that, that meets both of those criteria. That is, it has some symbolic value, it is some gathering of some importance, and because it is something that brings an assembly of people together, it offers opportunities for running up high body counts. Often, in today's world, whether it's Super Bowls or political conventions or other events, the actual venue itself will be considerably hardened. I mean, to get into a Super Bowl now, it's like boarding an airplane. But the transportation feeds into that will not have that same level of security, and so that does represent a vulnerability. So the terrorists can achieve the same symbolic effect because the attack will be associated with the event. But one of the reasons that terrorists are attracted to surface transportation in the first place, and we know this from the way they have talked about them, is because this is easy access, it's public transportation, concentrations of people in, whether we're talking about subways or tunnels or buses, in a confined environment which enhances the effects of both conventional explosives and unconventional weapons. And so that's why these earlier statistics that I mentioned underscore the fact that terrorists see surface transportation as an available killing field.
More questions? In the back, Rob.
From Congressional Quarterly. I was just wondering, the tabletop exercises, particularly in the major cities, are you also looking, is there any collaboration with city authorities about what it would mean as far as infrastructure if public transportation were down for 2 or 3 days, people getting to work, economic effects, how critical infrastructure like hospitals would continue to operate if many of its employees who take public transportation wouldn't be able to get to work?
One thing that we've done in Boston is prepared a plan to use buses only. So if the subway were attacked and we had an alternative and there was no threat to the buses, we would go everything above ground and run those buses. Now, is that going to equal the passenger flow that we can on a subway train? Absolutely not. So there would have to be contingency plans for some people that wouldn't be able to get to work by the bus. So we have worked in that area. I would say it's a work in progress. And as I said earlier, it's simple to sit down and say that we'll do X, Y, and Z, but implementing that might have its challenges.
Can I add something to that?
Yeah.
Because there is a Department of Homeland Security research effort. Unfortunately, given the uncertain budgetary environment, it is not clear whether it will continue or not, but it's called the Urban Commerce and Security Study. And it is an attempt to bring together, to basically create a model that will attempt to measure, assess the economic effects of an array of various terrorist scenarios in an urban commercial environment, as well as assess the potential positive and adverse effects of security measures that are put in place to prevent those attacks. And hopefully, the idea is that whether or not the mathematical models ultimately work is less important. By exploring this, you can, the objective is that people involved in positions of authority in the cities will be able to make more informed, more sophisticated decisions about allocation of security resources, what risks they're taking, and what positive and negative effects they are creating through those security measures.
All right, that's all we have time for. I just one more question. Who's more of a security threat, Red Sox fans or Yankees fans?
They're both a significant threat.
All right. It's true. I've been on. Thank you all very much.